The fog rolled in thick from the ocean, curling around the abandoned beach cottages like ghostly fingers. The salty wind carried whispers that seemed to speak directly into the protagonist's ears, though the night was otherwise silent. Every step on the damp sand felt heavy, almost as if the shoreline itself resisted their presence. The boardwalk creaked beneath their weight, the wood groaning in a way that seemed to echo unseen movements. The first story thread began here. The protagonist approached a cluster of cottages, long abandoned but somehow alive. Windows rattled, doors swung open and shut with no wind, and the faint glow of candlelight flickered in rooms that should have been empty. Shadows stretched unnaturally across peeling walls. Furniture seemed to shift subtly when not directly observed. Whispers called the protagonist's name, soft at first, then louder, almost desperate. As they moved along the sand, a second story thread unfolded. The pier jutted into the Black Sea, warped and twisted, as if the ocean itself had reshaped it. Footsteps echoed along the wooden planks, but each time the protagonist turned, no one was there. Waves crashed unnaturally loud, drowning out the occasional screech of gulls. The fog thickened, swallowing the distant lighthouse in the ghostly haze. A rocking chair at the pier's edge swayed violently, as if moved by invisible hands. The whispers grew urgent. Leave or stay forever. The third thread began subtly. Reflections. Tidal pools shimmered with distorted images. The protagonist caught glimpses of themselves moving independently, their own reflection grinning when their lips were still pressed together. The sand between their toes seemed to ripple, forming shapes that resembled figures crouched and watching. With each step, the fog tightened, and the familiar coastline warped into an impossible maze. Every beach cottage now looked different, like the walls themselves had shifted since the last glance. A sudden gust of wind carried a new sound, the faint echo of children laughing, followed by a low moan. The protagonist froze, heart hammering. In one cottage, a door creaked open on its own, revealing only darkness inside. From the pier, a shadow separated from the fog, gliding silently toward them. The tidal pools shimmered violently, their reflection forming a face not their own. Every sensory detail, the smell of wet wood, the salt in the air, the whispering wind, combined into a symphony of dread. The protagonist tried to rationalize. Maybe the cottages were empty. Maybe the fog was playing tricks. But logic failed as footsteps echoed behind, yet no one could be seen. A single candle flickered in a window of a distant house. Approaching it, they saw faint symbols etched into the frame, ritualistic markings, the kind that suggested something far older and darker than any living resident. The whispers intensified, voices overlapping. You shouldn't have come. You can't leave. Suddenly, a door slammed shut somewhere along the beach, startling a flock of birds into the night sky. The wind carried the scent of decay, of something rotting beneath the dunes. The protagonist's eyes were drawn to a rocking chair on the boardwalk, moving violently despite no one being near it. From the shadow of the pier, they glimpsed shapes forming, humanoid but wrong, too tall, too thin, with faces obscured. Panic surged, but curiosity anchored them to the sand, compelling them forward. Then came the voices of the vanished, first faint, then screaming, overlapping with the sound of the waves. They spoke in fractured sentences. Do not follow. Stay forever. You are one of us. The sand shifted beneath their feet, as if alive, drawing them toward the largest cottage near the lighthouse. The tidal pools reflected an impossible scene. All three horror threads converged, the cottages alive, the pier haunted, the reflections moving independently, forming a single coherent nightmare that the protagonist was now inside. Heart racing, the protagonist approached the door of the largest cottage. The fog coiled around them like a living entity, whispers screaming in their mind. One step inside, and the air grew colder, almost viscous. The floorboards moaned, the shadows lengthened, and the reflection in the broken glass seemed to reach for them. The first chapter ends here, leaving the audience with the undeniable sense the beach is alive, watching, and nothing about this night is real or safe.
The fog had thickened overnight, clinging to every splintered plank of the coastal cottages. The protagonist's footsteps were muffled against the sand, yet somehow each step seemed to echo louder, as if the beach itself was amplifying their fear. The cottages, abandoned for decades, breathed in unison, doors creaking slightly, windows rattling as if alive. The first horror thread intensified. Inside one cottage, faint candlelight flickered, though no flame existed. Whispers called the protagonist's name with unsettling familiarity, rising and falling like a tide. A rocking chair shifted back and forth violently, though the air was still. The walls bore old, peeling wallpaper, adorned with symbols that seemed to shift when glanced at directly. Faded photographs of families long gone hung crooked, and in each frame the eyes appeared to follow. Furniture rearranged itself subtly, each movement suggesting unseen hands. Every corner hid shadows that seemed human, but melted when confronted directly. The second thread focused on the pier. The protagonist approached cautiously, noting the sand beneath the wooden planks had turned into a wet, shifting maze. Fog rolled off the water in thick waves, obscuring shapes that seemed to move independently. Footsteps echoed, yet none belonged to any human. A faint, eerie melody hummed from somewhere far along the pier, like a music box trapped in the wind. Waves slammed into the supports with unnatural force, leaving the protagonist disoriented, their pulse hammering in sync with the water's rhythm. From the darkness, fleeting silhouettes moved closer, disappearing when directly looked at, but always present in peripheral vision. The third thread unfolded in tidal pools. Broken glass and water reflections distorted reality. The protagonist glimpsed figures mimicking their own movements, but twisted and grotesque. Shadows slipped across the sand, merging with the reflections, creating monstrous doubles. Their reflections spoke in voices not their own, whispering secrets about past visitors who never left the coast. The sand seemed alive, shifting beneath their feet as if trying to claim them. Each pool mirrored a slightly different nightmare. One of the cottages aflame, one of the pier collapsing, one of their own doppelgangers smiling maliciously. The protagonist's breath came in shallow gasps as the fog thickened. From the cottages, the whispers grew coherent, speaking in broken sentences. "Do not leave. Stay with us. The beach hungers." The wind carried scents of rotting seaweed mixed with the iron tang of blood, making every step more unnerving. Old shutters banged against walls, and doors swung open suddenly, revealing nothing but darkness, yet the sense of unseen watchers grew. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the sand. In one swift movement, the rocking chair on the pier lurched violently forward, almost as if propelled by a human hand. A faint silhouette in a doorway beckoned, then vanished. The protagonist's mind raced. Were the cottages sentient, or were they trapped by a curse, replaying horrors for decades? The tidal pool shimmered, reflecting impossible scenes, past visitors being dragged into the fog, shadows climbing the pier, and unseen hands reaching out from the cottage's broken windows. A child's laughter echoed from the dunes, chilling in its innocence, yet tinged with malice. The figure of a boy stood near one cottage, pointing toward the water. "They want you next." Panic surged, yet the protagonist felt compelled to move forward, each step dragging them deeper into the intertwined nightmares. A door creaked behind them. Inside, personal items of missing people lay scattered, from rusted toys to weathered letters. Shadows flickered along the walls, bending unnaturally toward them. The wind shifted abruptly, carrying the sounds of waves, whispers, and footsteps in a chaotic symphony of dread. Each thread, cottages, pier, tidal pools, seemed to converge. The air thickened, almost liquid in its heaviness. The protagonist's reflection in the pools twisted further, smiling when they did not. The cottage's doors groaned open on their own, beckoning them inside. The rocking chair continued its violent motion, and the distant pier seemed to extend further into the fog, impossible in geometry. As the protagonist hesitated, a chorus of whispers merged into one chilling command: "Step inside and join us forever." The chapter ends with the protagonist standing at the edge of the largest cottage, the door slightly ajar, fog curling around them. Whispers screamed, reflections twisted, and the rocking chair loomed like a sentinel. The audience is left suspended in anticipation, unsure whether the protagonist will enter and confront the horrors or be pulled into the beach's malevolent grip. Hook or cliffhanger for next chapter. As their hand touches the doorknob, all whispers coalesce into one chilling command: "Step inside and join us forever." The fog thickened even further, curling around every wooden plank of the boardwalk like ghostly fingers. Each step forward felt heavier, the sand beneath the protagonist's feet squelching unnaturally. The cottages loomed on either side, their broken windows like empty eyes, flickering faintly with impossible light. From the dunes, shadows slithered, stretching and bending as if alive, moving independently of any source. The fog hung low over the pier, thick and unyielding, curling around the wooden posts like living tendrils. Each step the protagonist took made the old boards groan underfoot, echoing into the night as if the pier itself were awake and aware of their presence. The ocean beyond churned violently, waves crashing against the supports with unnatural force, spraying icy water that smelled of brine and decay. The distant sound of a foghorn moaned through the mist, a lonely and haunting wail that carried a warning. As they moved further along the pier, shadows shifted in the fog. Shapes appeared at the edges of vision, elongated figures, human-like but distorted. Each time the protagonist blinked or turned, the figures vanished, only to reappear a step or two closer, keeping pace silently, a constant, unseen pressure. The night air felt heavier with each passing second, almost suffocating, saturated with the scent of damp wood, seaweed, and something far fouler, an aroma of forgotten sorrow. Alongside the pier, decrepit cottages leaned toward the water, their windows dark and empty. Doors slammed abruptly in the distance, then opened just as suddenly, the movement seeming to happen of its own accord. Inside, the faint glow of lanterns flickered,
casting moving shadows that danced and stretched across the walls, though the rooms were empty. Each house seemed alive, aware of the intruder who dared to walk the shoreline at this cursed hour. The protagonist paused at a broken railing, peering down at the dark waves below. They could hear faint murmurs rising from the sea itself, like voices trying to speak through the crashing water. Names, half-formed sentences, whispers of terrible secrets. "You shouldn't be here. They're watching. Leave now," slithered into their mind, creating a cacophony of paranoia. A sudden gust of wind whipped across the pier, carrying the whispers more clearly. "You're next." Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the pier seemed to stretch endlessly into the fog, impossibly long. Panic gripped the protagonist as the first footsteps echoed behind them, not their own, heavier, deliberate, moving in rhythm with the creaking boards. They spun, but saw nothing. The fog swallowed all vision. Still, the footsteps continued, always just a heartbeat behind, always keeping pace. A faint light appeared in one of the cottages, and the protagonist, desperate for any clue, approached. The door swung open slowly, revealing a room filled with overturned chairs and broken furniture. On the walls were photographs, aged and yellowed, showing people who had vanished along this stretch of coast. Each face stared out with hollow, pleading eyes. The protagonist felt a cold finger of dread trace down their spine as the shadows on the walls began to flicker, forming the vague shapes of these missing souls. From behind, a chair rocked violently on its own. The floor beneath the protagonist seemed to shift subtly, boards bending as if the pier itself were alive. The whispers rose in volume, now joined by a chorus of soft, unnatural laughter. Shapes emerged from the fog, shadows that slid across the pier's surface like dark water, some reaching toward the protagonist with inhumanly long limbs. Every movement felt preordained, every step forward tightening the invisible noose of terror. The protagonist stumbled, heart pounding, lungs burning, toward the edge of the pier where a small rowboat bobbed in the waves. Tentatively, they clutched its edge, intending to escape by water, but the mist around it thickened, wrapping their vision in suffocating gray. The waves surged unnaturally, spraying high and cold, and the voices whispered urgently from all sides, "Stay, you belong here." The reflection in the water warped their own image, twisted, smiling with malice, eyes blackened and void-like. A sudden violent crash from a nearby cottage made the protagonist spin, only to find the door wide open and the interior empty. The rocking chair inside lurched toward the doorway as if propelled by an invisible force. From the shadows emerged faint human-like shapes, dragging themselves across the floor, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their whispered chants merging with the crashing waves. "Join us forever." The protagonist ran, feeling the wooden planks underfoot shift like quicksand, the pier itself a living trap. With every step, the fog thickened, the whispers multiplied, and the distant cottages seemed to grow taller, looming over them like dark, watchful sentinels. Footsteps echoed once more behind them, heavier and louder, matching the racing of their own heart. Every wave that crashed against the pier sounded like the laughter of something unseen, the sea itself alive with malevolent intent. Finally, reaching the far end of the pier, they saw the remnants of a small lighthouse perched precariously on the rocks. Its light was dead, yet a dim glow emanated from the fog around it, calling them forward. The protagonist took a trembling step toward it, and the whispers changed tone, more insistent, almost human. "Don't go. Stay here." Shadows lengthened across the sand and pier, merging with the fog, and a figure emerged briefly at the lighthouse door, a hooded form pointing directly at them.
Panic surged, and the protagonist sprinted down the pier, heart hammering, lungs burning. The mist swirled around their legs like grasping hands. Every cottage seemed alive, its windows flickering, shadows crawling along walls, faint echoes of voices crying out names they didn't recognize. Waves crashed, spray stung their face, and the fog rolled with a life of its own, pulling them forward. The figure at the lighthouse remained, a dark sentinel, its hands still pointing, waiting. As they reached the edge of the pier, the fog swallowed the horizon. The ocean's roar intensified, as if mocking their desperation. The whispers now surrounded them, coming from the waves, the cottages, the very wood of the pier itself. "You will not leave. You belong to the coast." With a final frantic leap, the protagonist stumbled onto the sand, leaving the pier behind. But the horror did not end. The beach houses behind twisted impossibly in the fog, shadows flickering in impossible shapes. The whispers lingered, promising that the coast would claim them eventually. Somewhere, the rocking chair continued to sway violently, and the distant lighthouse stood, watching, waiting, its glow pulsing, faintly, like a heartbeat. The next chapter awaited, and the horrors of the coastal village and the mirror-like tides were just around the corner.
The protagonist stumbled along the fog-laden shoreline, each footstep sinking into wet sand that seemed to pull at their shoes. Ahead, the faint outline of a coastal village emerged, half hidden in the mist. At first, it appeared ordinary. Rows of weathered cottages, narrow alleys, and a single lighthouse looming in the distance. But something was off. The streets were unnaturally silent. No gulls cried, no waves crashed with normal rhythm, and the wind whispered in strange, broken tones. As they ventured further, the cottages' windows seemed to flicker with candlelight, yet no smoke rose from chimneys. Doors opened slightly, then slammed shut without wind, as if testing the protagonist's courage. Every building looked familiar, and yet impossibly wrong. Angles warped, walls leaning slightly inward, roofs higher or lower than they should be. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. Something inside them told them this village had been abandoned long ago, or perhaps had never truly existed. The protagonist's steps quickened. Footsteps echoed softly behind them, matching their pace, but never revealing a source. A cold draft curled through the alleys, carrying faint laughter of children that quickly turned to shrill cries. Shadows flickered along the cottage's walls, forming humanoid shapes that disappeared the moment the protagonist turned. A dog barked in the distance. Though no dog could be seen, the sound reverberating unnaturally, as if the village itself were alive and mocking them. Tide pools reflected distorted images, showing buildings taller than in reality, the sky darker, waves moving in unnatural patterns. The protagonist leaned over to look into one pool, catching their own reflection, but something was wrong. Their eyes flickered black for a fraction of a second, and a grin they hadn't made stretched across their face. They stumbled back, the pool rippling violently as if warning them to leave. The whisperings from the earlier cottages had returned, now more insistent. "They're waiting for you." They entered a narrow street lined with abandoned beach cottages, their shutters rattling in silence. One door creaked open as they passed, revealing a room filled with upturned chairs and shattered mirrors. Faint figures moved inside, humanoid but indistinct, watching silently. Every step into the village amplified the sense of being trapped. Alleys looped back onto themselves, and landmarks shifted subtly, as if the village itself were alive, rearranging paths to confuse and ensnare. Suddenly, a child appeared near a lifeguard tower, wearing tattered clothing soaked with mist. The child's eyes were hollow, yet strangely knowing.
Pointing toward the foggy beach, they whispered in a voice far too adult for their age, "They're waiting for you." The protagonist froze, heart hammering, realizing the child was not alone. Shadows detached from the cottages and dunes, gliding silently toward them. Each shadow seemed to carry pieces of people who had vanished from this very coastline. Faces twisted in terror, hands reaching out, mouths moving in silent screams. Panic surged. They ran through winding alleys where sand had begun to spill onto the streets from the shore. Windows along the cottages reflected the protagonist's frantic movements, but each reflection was subtly wrong. A limb bent inhumanly. A shadow lingered where none should exist. The whispering followed them everywhere, voices overlapping, repeating their name, urging them to look behind, to stop, to surrender. The fog thickened, swallowing the cottages one by one. The protagonist stumbled into a central square where a fountain stood, dry and cracked, yet the water's surface rippled unnaturally. Shadows slithered along the ground, mimicking the waves of the tide, crawling closer. From the lighthouse in the distance, a dim light pulsed, illuminating the village in intermittent flashes, revealing rows of ghostly figures standing just beyond the cottages, watching, waiting, and beckoning. Every alley they tried led them back to the square. Every path twisted impossibly, streets merging and bending, cottages shifting. The village itself had become a labyrinth, designed to disorient and ensnare anyone who dared enter. And in the center, the fountain reflected something horrifying. The protagonist's face split into multiple versions, screaming silently, eyes wide in eternal terror. A door creaked open in one of the larger cottages. Inside, walls were covered with photographs of missing visitors, much like the pier. Each face looked directly at the protagonist, eyes wide with panic. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of salt, decay, and something metallic, like old blood. Whispering intensified, merging with waves, wind, and the distant hum of the lighthouse. "You can't leave. You belong here." They tried to flee toward the shoreline, but the village's edges had vanished. Sand stretched endlessly, merging with the fog, and every familiar landmark twisted into something grotesque. The cottages were now sentinels, towering, doors opening and closing, windows glowing faintly as shadows moved inside. Shapes emerged from every corner, thin and humanoid, following silently, moving just beyond vision, always present, yet intangible. Tears ran down their face, mixing with the mist as they ran. The whispers became coherent, almost chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." Panic and despair collided as the protagonist realized that no matter where they turned, the village adjusted itself to trap them. Waves lapped at impossible angles, tide pools reflected horrors unseen, and every shadow seemed alive. Finally, the protagonist spotted a faint pathway leading toward the distant lighthouse. The pulsing light beckoned, a promise of escape, or perhaps a final terror. With trembling legs and a pounding heart, they sprinted toward it, shadows trailing silently behind, whispering, laughing, urging them to join the lost souls of the vanishing coastal village. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the cottages behind twisted impossibly in the fog. Tide pools reflected not the ocean, but endless rows of empty eyes staring back at them. The whispers continued, a promise and a warning. "They're waiting, and you can never leave." The night was far from over, and the horrors of the village had only begun to consume the protagonist. The next chapter, The Mirror of the Shore, would reveal the true depth of the beach's supernatural terror. The protagonist stumbled along the fog-drenched beach, heart pounding in rhythm with the crashing waves. The coastal village behind them had vanished into mist, leaving only a stretch of sand, scattered tidal pools, and the skeletons of abandoned beach cottages looming like silent sentinels. Every step they took left footprints that seemed to move when they looked away, as if the shore itself were alive and mocking them. As they approached a large tidal pool near the dunes, they noticed something deeply unsettling. Their reflection did not mirror their movements precisely. When they raised a hand, the reflection delayed, lingering for a moment before mimicking them. But the grin that spread across the face in the reflection was not theirs. Panic surged. They stumbled back, the sand beneath their feet suddenly shifting, exposing more pools filled with warped, distorted images of themselves. Some showed their face screaming silently. Others showed them crawling, trapped, or missing limbs. The wind carried whispers, soft but insistent. "You can't leave. You belong." The protagonist spun, scanning the beach. Every abandoned cottage now appeared closer than it should be, as if drawn to them. Windows rattled without wind, doors creaked open, and shadows moved inside, humanoid but grotesque, stretching impossibly tall, bending unnaturally. Each shadow seemed to observe, silently judging, silently waiting. Faint candlelight flickered in one of the cottages, casting elongated silhouettes across the sand. A rocking chair moved back and forth on the porch, despite the absence of a breeze. The protagonist approached, compelled by curiosity and terror, and glimpsed inside. Walls covered with mirrors of every shape and size, reflecting endless copies of the same beach, the same dunes, and their own face twisting in horror over and over. Each reflection moved independently, whispering secrets and names the protagonist had never known. A sudden movement caught their eye. A figure emerged from the fog, humanoid but thin, elongated, its eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. It mimicked their movements perfectly, yet with a delay that was just enough to terrify. As the protagonist ran along the shoreline, the figure followed, always a few steps behind, vanishing whenever they looked directly at it. Behind, the cottages themselves seemed to pulse with life, shutters clanging, doors slamming, and windows flashing with ghostly images. They tripped over a sand dune and fell near a pool that reflected not just their face, but multiple versions of themselves, some laughing, some crying, some staring blankly. One reflection spoke, "You will never leave this shore." The protagonist scrambled backward, terror clawing at their chest. The wind intensified, carrying distant cries of children, the slamming of doors, and the unnatural lapping of waves that sounded like fingernails scraping stone. The beach cottages now appeared in clusters, forming a labyrinth of sand and broken wood. Each cottage held hints of prior visitors, overturned chairs, shattered windows, and faint impressions of footsteps that led nowhere. The protagonist passed one, catching a glimpse of a shadow inside moving independently of the reflection. It leaned toward the glass, grinning, and whispered their name in a voice that was both theirs and not theirs. As they ran, tidal pools multiplied unnaturally, reflecting countless horrors, drowned figures rising from the sand, shadows stretching across dunes, and distorted faces staring silently. The protagonist's own reflection occasionally stepped out of the pool, mimicking their fear, but with a calmness that made it impossible to escape. Every wave that lapped at the shore seemed to carry more shadows with it, gliding silently toward them. The lighthouse in the distance pulsed with dim light, beckoning, promising either salvation or ultimate doom. Shadows from the cottages and pools converged toward the protagonist, whispering constantly, urging them to look behind, to surrender, to join the trapped souls of the shore. Sand shifted beneath their feet, tidal pools erupted as if breathing, and the beach became an ever-changing maze of horrors, loops, and reflections. The protagonist stumbled into a clearing between two cottages. Mirrors leaned against walls, some cracked, some whole. Each mirror reflected not the clearing, but different times, different horrors, and different versions of the protagonist, some alive, some trapped, some screaming silently. A shadow emerged from one of the broken mirrors, grabbing at the protagonist's sleeve. Their fingers felt cold, wet, and insubstantial, yet terrifyingly real. "You can't leave this shore," it whispered, voice both distant and inside their mind. The protagonist ran toward the distant lighthouse, tidal pools sloshing and forming ghostly faces in their paths. Every cottage passed seemed to shift closer, closing off escape routes. The shadows from the windows leaned outward, elongated and grotesque, reaching for them. Waves crashed unnaturally, sand rose in small twisters, and the wind carried screams and laughter, indistinguishable in their terror. Finally, they reached the base of the lighthouse. Reflections in nearby puddles mirrored the full horror of the journey. The vanishing village, the haunted cottages, the doppelgangers in the pools, and the countless shadows converging. The whispers formed a chant, "You belong, you belong." Gasping, shivering, and heart-pounding, the protagonist realized that the mirror of the shore was not merely a place, but a trap. Each step forward brought them closer to the unknown entity controlling the beach, closer to the final terror awaiting them at the lighthouse. The horrors of the shore, the shadows, the distorted reflections, the whispering wind, and the malevolent cottages had merged into a single oppressive presence that would not release them easily. With trembling resolve, they ascended the sand toward the lighthouse, the shadows at their heels, reflections in tidal pools stretching to infinity. Every moment brought them closer to the ultimate confrontation, the revelation that the beach itself was alive, aware, and waiting for their soul. The mirror of the shore had claimed them, at least partially, bending their reality, twisting their mind, and ensnaring them in a nightmare that felt painfully real. And as the lighthouse's light pulsed over the dunes, the protagonist knew the true horror was only beginning.
The fog rolled heavier over the beach, curling around abandoned cottages and skeleton-like dunes. The protagonist's footsteps sank into the damp sand, muffled only by the eerie lapping of waves. Every sound, every whisper of wind, every distant creak seemed amplified, echoing with a malevolence that made the skin crawl. They felt eyes watching from the cottages, though no one was there. Shadows flickered, human-shaped, yet impossibly tall, moving just beyond the corner of their vision. The fog thickened as the protagonist stumbled along the wet sand, each step sinking slightly into the cold, damp ground. The faint glow of moonlight struggled to pierce through the dense mist, illuminating only hints of the ruined beach houses scattered along the shore. Every house seemed alive in its desolation,
Windows rattled though no wind blew. Doors creaked as if whispering secrets from within. The air was heavy with the scent of salt water and decay, mingling with an unshakable sense of being watched. Shadows flickered unnaturally across the dunes, elongated and distorted by the pale moonlight. They moved independently, detaching themselves from the crumbling cottages and following silently behind. Each wave that crashed against the shore seemed to carry a distorted echo of human voices, low and murmuring, yet none could be seen. The protagonist's heartbeat quickened. They knew instinctively that the shadows were not just tricks of the light. They were sentient, stalking, waiting for the perfect moment. A sudden flicker of movement caught their eye, a silhouette separating from the fog, gliding silently across the sand. It resembled a person, but moved with an unnatural fluidity, like smoke or water given form. Panic surged. The protagonist ran, sand spraying behind their feet, the water lapping cold and wet against their ankles. With every desperate sprint, the shadows multiplied, surrounding them from all sides, their edges sharp and jagged in the eerie glow. A chilling realization set in. Every path led back to the same section of beach, the same ruined pier, the same line of coastal houses. No matter how fast or far they ran, escape was impossible. Among the shadows, the shapes of the abandoned beach houses began to shift subtly. Walls warped, doors opened slightly, then slammed shut. Windows stared blankly like unblinking eyes. The protagonist noticed a rocking chair on the porch of one house, swaying violently, though there was no wind. A faint whisper traveled through the fog, curling around their ears. "You'll never leave this beach." Each word dripped with malice and certainty, freezing the blood in their veins. The protagonist pressed on toward the ruined lighthouse in the distance, the one beacon of supposed safety along this cursed shore. But the path itself betrayed them. Tide pools reflected impossible images, dozens of distorted versions of themselves, staring up, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. The sand beneath their feet felt alive, shifting with the rhythm of the waves. A wet hand, or what felt like one, brushed their ankle. They jumped, heart pounding, and looked down. No one was there. Yet a shadow, darker than the night itself, wrapped around their leg for just a heartbeat before vanishing. They stumbled, desperate for a way out, and the fog seemed to ripple as if mocking their panic. From the dunes, faint footsteps echoed, synchronized with each of the protagonist's hurried steps. But when they paused, the footsteps continued, separate from their own, circling, stalking, closing in. The whispers returned, now distinct, almost coherent, calling their name in taunting repetition. "Come closer, come closer, stay." One ruined beach house ahead suddenly illuminated, lights flickering as if someone or something was watching them from within. The front door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but shadowed interior and peeling wallpaper. Yet from inside came a low hum of chanting, distant yet palpable, vibrating through the wet sand. The protagonist's instinct screamed to flee, but their feet seemed glued to the shore. Panic and fear intertwined, a storm in their chest. As they pushed past the boardwalk leading to the lighthouse, they caught movement in the corner of their eye. The shadows had multiplied, now forming humanoid shapes with indistinct, writhing forms. Some glided over the sand, some crawled across the boards of the pier like insects. The beach, once familiar in its eerie stillness, now seemed alive with malevolent intent. Every house, every dune, every wave conspiring to trap them forever. The protagonist's breathing grew ragged, echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. A sudden chill swept across the beach, freezing the sweat on their brow. From the dunes, a deep, guttural voice murmured, "You belong to us." Shadows surged forward, closer and closer, merging into one mass of darkness that blocked the path to the lighthouse. Each wave that crashed against the pier seemed to push them back, and the whispers grew into an overwhelming cacophony, thousands of voices, overlapping, distorted, speaking in tongues of warning and despair. Desperate, the protagonist turned, trying to run back along the fog-laden shore. But the path twisted impossibly, dunes shifting, tide pools opening up like gaping mouths, reflecting endless versions of themselves, screaming in silence. The fog pressed in like a living entity, obscuring every exit. The lighthouse no longer seemed reachable. Its light flickered, almost mocking, as if taunting them with a false promise of safety. The shadows converged, stretching tendrils of darkness over the sand. Their whispered threats became shrill cries, accusing, demanding, reminding, "You cannot leave, you cannot leave." The protagonist stumbled once more, falling into a tide pool. The water rippled, and their reflection grinned at them independently, lips moving in a silent curse. The cold water lapped at their face, dragging them down, the shadows tightening their grip even without touching, bending the very reality around them. With a final surge of adrenaline, the protagonist sprinted blindly toward the lighthouse, the shadows and whispers in relentless pursuit. Each heartbeat matched the pounding of the waves, each breath a gasp in the ocean of dread that surrounded them. The ruined beach houses loomed on either side, doors slamming, windows staring blankly, the fog curling like fingers to trap them. The pier beneath their feet groaned as though protesting their passage, yet they pressed on knowing the final encounter awaited, but at what cost? And as they reached the base of the lighthouse, the shadows paused, not gone, not leaving, but waiting, watching, breathing in the night, ready to converge once the final step was taken. The protagonist looked up at the spiraling tower above them, knowing instinctively that nothing beyond those walls would ever be the same. The waves crashed, the fog thickened, and the beach whispered its final chilling warning. "You'll never leave this place alive."
The protagonist's legs ached, their lungs burned, and salt water stung their eyes, yet they continued toward the lighthouse. The spiraling structure loomed above like a sentinel of doom, its broken windows reflecting flickers of firelight from the fog-shrouded dunes. The shadows that had stalked them all night lingered behind, stretching and twisting, writhing against the pale moonlight. Every wave crashing against the shore seemed to echo with distorted whispers of the missing, the drowned, and the lost. As they approached the lighthouse entrance, the sand shifted unnaturally beneath their feet. Tide pools bubbled and churned, reflecting impossible, warped images. Versions of themselves screaming silently, hands clawing at the water. The fog coiled around the lighthouse like serpents, obscuring the door. With a trembling hand, the protagonist pushed open the rotting wooden door. A cold, wet wind burst out, extinguishing any flicker of light they carried. And the shadows surged forward, pressing in, whispering, "You cannot leave. You belong to us." Inside, the air was thick with decay and the metallic tang of blood. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, half buried under dust and sand that seemed to have infiltrated from outside. The spiral staircase leading to the lantern room towered above, each step groaning as if protesting their ascent.
But before they could climb, the shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, faceless and rippling like black water frozen mid-motion. Their mouths moved, but no words came out, only a silent scream that the protagonist felt in their chest. A sudden, blinding light erupted from the lantern room above, casting the shadows into sharp relief. One figure separated from the mass, gliding silently toward the protagonist. It stopped inches away, and the protagonist could feel its presence pressing against their chest, cold and heavy, like the weight of the ocean itself. Then the whisper came, clear and insidious. "You should have left when you could." The protagonist stumbled back, heart hammering, but the door behind them had vanished, replaced by a wall of shifting fog. Every exit closed, leaving only the staircase spiraling upward. Gathering courage, they ascended. Each step seemed infinite. The shadows climbed behind, merging with the fog that now poured through the cracks of the lighthouse like living smoke. Halfway up, they glimpsed horrific visions in the windows, drowned sailors, faceless villagers, and unidentifiable creatures emerging from the water, reaching toward the shore. The images flickered and disappeared when looked at directly, but the sense of dread remained. Reaching the lantern room, the protagonist found a circle of hooded figures, their identities obscured, chanting in a language older than the sea. In the center was a glowing, pulsating object, radiating darkness and cold. The shadows from the beach merged with the hooded figures, swirling around the room like a storm trapped in stone. The protagonist realized that the ritual wasn't just a summoning, it was a prison, a trap designed to pull them into the beach forever. They tried to run, but invisible forces pushed them toward the circle. The chanting intensified, and the lighthouse walls seemed to bend, breathing in time with the ritual. A ghostly child from earlier appeared at the edge of the room, pointing a finger, eyes wide and pleading, "It's too late. Stay with us." Panic surged, adrenaline and terror mixing into a sharp edge of determination. The protagonist lunged at the glowing object, hoping to destroy it, but hands, cold, wet, and insistent, clawed from the shadows, wrapping around their limbs, dragging them down. Time distorted. Every heartbeat felt like hours. The sea's roar mixed with the whispers, now screaming in unison, "Yours, yours, yours." The protagonist screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that seemed to echo through centuries of trapped souls. The glowing object pulsed violently, light and shadow clashing in a chaotic storm. For a brief instant, they glimpsed themselves, not in reflection, but as a shadow among the waves, twisted and faceless, reaching toward the shore in silent despair. With one final surge, they ripped free, throwing the object into the tidal pool outside the lighthouse. A deafening scream erupted, shadows recoiling violently as the circle collapsed into dust and mist. The fog twisted, spiraled, and then everything went silent. The lighthouse towered above, still, as though nothing had happened. The protagonist gasped, alone, soaked, trembling, staring at the now calm beach. Yet the air was heavy, the sense of dread never fully lifting. Tide pools reflected themselves, but not quite accurately. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved just beyond perception. The whispers lingered in the wind, faint, almost apologetic, but still insistent. "You cannot leave. You will return." The protagonist stumbled down to the shore, the ruins of beach cottages and pier now eerily quiet. For a moment, the night seemed calm, almost inviting, but a faint rocking of an empty chair on a distant porch made them pause. The waves lapped gently at the sand, yet every splash carried a distorted echo. Footsteps, whispers, cries. They realized, with a shiver that would never leave, that the beach never truly releases its victims. As the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the fog, the protagonist looked back at the lighthouse. Its windows glinted like dark eyes, and the spiraling tower seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeat. They had survived, but the beach had marked them. Somewhere deep inside, they could feel it. The shadows had claimed a part of them. And the whispers, faint but certain, promised that the story was far from over. They took one final step toward the ocean, waves washing over their feet, but the wind carried the same chilling words they had heard all night. You'll never leave this beach alive, not really. And with that, the fog closed in again, swallowing the shore, the lighthouse, and the secrets of the night, leaving only silence and a lingering terror that would haunt anyone who dared to imagine the horrors within.